When it comes to games, not many are as infamous as Dark Souls. I'm sure most of us have our own story when it comes to these games. My journey as a content creator is closely tied to Dark Souls. I wanted to give my thoughts on the game and the lessons it has taught me about myself. To give a little background, streaming is something I'd always wanted to try, but always seemed out of my reach. I was always worried that I wouldn't be good enough at it, or that I would just embarrass myself. One day I decided to stop worrying and just jump right in. I was quite fortunate that after a while I managed to create a nice tight-knit community. Eventually, people started suggesting games they wanted to see me play. Of course, Dark Souls was on that list. I think it is a rite of passage at this point for new streamers. No matter what you start streaming, what type of community you manage to build, all roads lead to Dark Souls. At the time, I had very little experience with FromSoft games. I'd only played a little of Sekiro and only managed to beat the first boss. Those games are also wildly different, so even a minimal experience wouldn't have been of much use. My idea of the Souls series at this point was that they were just games that were difficult for the sake of being difficult. I knew they were RPGs, but that was about it in terms of gameplay. To me, they existed to just punish people. Almost like they were memes and the people who suggested them just wanted to watch someone struggle and get mad. Most of the things I had heard were about the unfair nature of the game, or how people didn't think I'd make it past certain bosses. With many people urging me to go in blind and give the game a solid chance, I did just that. I jumped in knowing as close to nothing as possible, and well, it went about as well as you would expect. The Asylum Demon crushed me for a little, but I eventually defeated him, and made my way to Firelink Shrine. Now here, I did what any sane person would do, and decided to attack one of the first people I saw in this game who didn't immediately try and kill me. This guy absolutely battered me, and I died. The look of shock I had when I respawned, only for him to be there and ready to kill me again, and again, and again, until eventually I got lucky and he just rolled off the cliff to his death. I learned very quickly that yes, I had the ability to essentially play this game how I wanted, but that my actions would have consequences. As we all know, the thing about Dark Souls is that the games really don't hold your hand. You are left to your own devices to work out where to go and what to do next. On my first playthrough, the first place I went to explore was the New Londo ruins. So, one of the first enemies I encountered was one that didn't take damage unless I used a certain passive item. To me, this would be the norm. In my head, I was thinking, well, if this is what the first area is like, then what else is in store for me? Eventually I realised that maybe I shouldn't be here, so I decided to go explore other areas. I think this is the point to the openness at the start of the game. It teaches you that if things seem too hard, then chances are that isn't the right way for you to go. Luckily, the next place I checked was the correct one. It took some time, but I made my way to the Taurus Demon and then eventually the Gargoyles. The Gargoyles took me a long time, but I did eventually beat them. This is what I would argue is the first major challenge for players. It was at this point that I started to understand the game a little more. People would give me stick for the small failures, but that was part of the fun. It was all light-hearted. Then when I did see the famous victory achieved text flash on my screen, it felt great. I had overcome something. The same people giving me stick in chat were the ones most excited when I overcame the challenge. It was not what I expected. Now from here I had no clue where to go. I had chosen the Master Key as my item, but I had no clue how or where to use it. Luckily by chance I ended up at the gate for the Valley of Drakes. I'd finally found my way into Blighttown. This was one of them areas I had heard about and many people said this is where I would give up. Now would be a good time to mention that I had played the remastered version of the game, so the frame rate issues I hear so many people had weren't an issue for me. Coming in the back way also helped.
That's what she said!
We eventually made our way down to the Poison Swamp. This is one of them moments where I was just confused, wondering what the solution was to get around the swamp without taking damage. I had the moss clumps, but with the boss ahead, I knew that this was a journey I would have to keep making. This is one of them situations for a first time player, where both you and the game know it has the upper hand, and you just have to deal with it. Going into this boss I kept being told amazing chest ahead. Safe to say, I wasn't lied to. Even today, I have to question, is having the bottom half of a giant fire spider really that big of a red flag? This boss took me a while, but again, I eventually overcome it. This one felt better than the Gargoyles somehow. Not only was I starting to get a feel for how the game worked, I was also starting to understand what the combat wanted from me. I was learning to be patient. Funny enough, that patience would be my downfall in this attempt at beating the game. We made our way into the demon ruins, and honestly, I was full of confidence. In just a few streams I had made it this far. I felt like I was getting to grips with things and all was well. I was ready for a nice stroll through the tropical demon ruins. I found a nice skirt that I thought would suit me nicely. Apparently it wasn't for sale, and the giant lava demon behind the till wasn't too happy. Turns out this would be the brick wall I'd run into over and over and over again. Those of you who are familiar with Dark Souls will know this boss has a specific trick that 2 years ago I had no clue about. I had my chat calling him Cheeseless Discharge, so I was aware there was something. In my head I was too proud to use cheese. I didn't want an asterisk next to my win over the game, so I battled him head on for hours, getting a few good hits in and even getting close a couple of times. Eventually I looked around and noticed a large drop off. I remembered the full damage that killed the NPC from earlier. I knew I could use it to my advantage. So again, like any sane man, surely I would try and work out how to make this demon fall off the cliff, right? Right? Well, I am clearly not a sane man. I decided to repeatedly run into the same brick wall for another couple of hours before eventually giving in and trying to get him to fall off. After a couple of attempts it worked, but it felt empty. I continued on and made my way to the gold fog wall, but had to turn back. I made my way back up and headed towards Sen's fortress. This was the final straw for this attempt. The traps in this place broke me. I am someone that when I lose momentum in a game, it is hard to find motivation to go back. It is why I have so many unfinished games. If I stop playing for a few weeks, I just never go back because I feel lost. This was around Halloween, so I went to play some horror games instead, and I just didn't go back. That was until about 8 months later, Elden Ring was coming out. The day before I started Elden Ring, I decided to play Dark Souls and start fresh. Just wanted to mess around for a little and get a feel for the controls before Elden Ring. I ended up getting to Anor Londo in a space of about 6 hours. What had taken me 4 streams of playing only took me a quarter of that, but alas, Elden Ring came out and I got sucked into that instead. I didn't go back for a while after that, but I knew the day would come. Well, that day came, about a year later. In March of 2023, I finally got back to playing Dark Souls on stream, and I had an entirely new outlook on the game. This time it wasn't just rage bait to entertain chat. This time felt different. This time, I was doing it for me. I wanted to finally beat this game. I had to prove to myself that this game didn't get the best of me. The first half of this playthrough are here on the channel in the form of stream highlights. To cut a long story short, I did eventually beat the game. I got to Anor Londo, I beat Ornstein and Smough, I went and collected the Lord Souls, making sure I beat every boss along the way, even the optional ones. Made my way through the DLC and fought all 4 of them bosses, and finally, after attempting the game 3 times and giving up twice, the end was near. After around 470 deaths, I had finally done it. I had beaten this game. Now, I know I spent a while describing a playthrough from a few years back, but it was for good reason. The way I described it makes it sound like some big grand journey, when in reality, I just played and beat a game. Something people do every day. But rarely the games give me a complete 180 in perspective of them. A lot of the time you know what you were going to get from a game when you get started. Dark Souls wasn't normal in this regard. I went in with preconceived notions of what it was. As mentioned before, I went in just expecting to suffer, but once I finished the game, that is not how I felt at all. I was happy I had finally beat the game, but sad it was over. A few days after beating it on stream, I went back by myself and started another playthrough, just because I missed the game in the world. If you had told me 3 years ago when I was dying over and over again to Ceaseless Discharge that I would one day just decide to play the game for fun, I wouldn't have believed you. In my mind, I would have beaten the game, then just refused to go back. I always thought people who kept going back for more and more playthroughs were just masochists who enjoyed the struggling. But I finally understood it. There is a comfort in the Dark Souls world. Even after your first playthrough, there is still plenty to learn and experiment with. There is so much variety in what you can use. You see this with challenge runs. People are proving that even with the most outlandish weapon choices, you can beat this game. I never expected to love the game, but I do. It became one of my favourites and it scratches an itch that no other game can. Not even any of the other Souls games. I tried both 2 and 3, but both times I just wish I was playing the first game. Now, I am sure I will go back to them eventually, but I think the first one just has a special charm to it. But why? What about this game made me fall in love with it so much? This game that I was so wrong about. To start with, I want to talk about what type of game Dark Souls is, because on the surface it is an action RPG, but I think it is so much more than that. It becomes a puzzle game in more ways than one. Each area is like its own puzzle that you have to figure out, with doors and switches used to unlock each new level of the puzzle, slowly peeling back each layer. On a smaller scale, the bosses themselves are also like puzzles, and each attempt you reveal more and more of the puzzle until you become like Neo in the Matrix, seeing every telegraphed attack, every heal opportunity, every attack chance. Boss fights become a rhythm game. I heard people say that the boss fights are like dances, and when you start to understand how they work, that is really how they feel. If they do this, then I do that, and if they do that, then I do this. Playing for the first time, you just frantically dodge roll in any direction the second an enemy lunges at you. Doing this will probably end up getting you hit. It's all about being calm and timing. Precision beats power and timing beats speed. It's all about picking your opportunities at the right time. You will get openings, you just have to find them. Going back to how each area in this game feels like a puzzle, I have to say that one of the strongest aspects of Dark Souls to me is the world design. It's a bit cliche to say how a game's world acts like a character, and I don't think I truly understood that saying until playing Dark Souls. Everything from the music to how the map is designed contributes to this feeling of you being on a grand journey. I found myself saying thank you whenever the game presented a shortcut, or when I saw the glow of a bonfire in the distance. It is designed in a way that the map does really feel like a morally grey character. When finding these bonfires or shortcuts, it feels like the game deciding you need a break. However, sometimes the opposite is true. You make your way through a tough, grueling area only for no bonfire or shortcut in sight. You end up practically begging the game for something to help you out. I think a great example of this great world design is after you make your way through the depths in Blighttown, only to return back up top. You're brought out back where you started at Firelink Shrine, the start area of the game. The horrors you have just faced bring you back. This area that just feels safe, that you have time to breathe and gather yourself. You know you have more areas to explore and more hardships to come, but you can relax knowing you're safe here for now. Speaking of Firelink, now is a great time to mention the music. There are a couple pieces of Dark Souls music that really stuck with me, one of them being the Firelink music. There's a sense of calm to it. Despite all the horrors and death you have faced, there's a calmness to being here. You can relax a little. Music is slow and understated, like you are happy you are back to safety, but there are slight melancholic undertones. You know you have more of your journey to complete. You have a mission and you can't just stay here forever. One thing the game does incredibly well is that it saves the music for certain situations. There is not constant background music. For most of your journey, it's just you and the surroundings, which really amplifies the feelings of loneliness and despair you feel. When you do reach one of these fights though, you're in for a treat. Like most people, I probably spent the longest time of my playthrough fighting Ornstein and Smo. The orchestral music really adds to the scope of the battle. You already have this intense boss fight against the two hardest foes you have faced yet. But to top it all off, you have this piece playing in the background that just takes what is already an intense fight and turns it up to 11. Now, it would be unfair to talk about the music in Dark Souls and not talk about the fight with Gwyn. Once you have collected all the Lord Souls, you make your way down to face Gwyn. You have this long journey through the Kiln of the First Flame. This might be my favourite area visually in the entire game. You can tell that this place was once great with beautiful architecture, but now it is just ruins. There's not much left of this once great place. It's quite sad. Eventually you happen across the boss fight. This is it. Every fight you have had leading up to this moment. The final boss of the game. You enter and it's not what you expect. Every other boss fight had a full orchestra to help score the fight, but here you have just the one instrument, a piano. It is sad, this fight isn't like the others. Much like the area surrounding him, he is a ghost of his former self. Yes, he packs a punch, but you are aware the Gwyn you are fighting is not at the same power level as the one you have heard so much about through playing. You can parry his attacks like he is just a regular hollow. This is what it all came down to. I think the music is perfect for the final fight, even outside the context of the in-game lore. There are not many gaming experiences that compare to playing Dark Souls for the first time. I was happy I was here, yes, but it really is one of them games that I wish I could go back and experience for the first time again. The music backs those feelings up and you start to reminisce on the journey you took to get here. For me, that journey spanned nearly 3 years, with multiple attempts. I got knocked down plenty of times, but I persevered and just kept on going. kept on coming back. When coming up with the idea for this video, one of the first things I wrote down was perfect in spite of its imperfections. I can't think of a game this applies to more than Dark Souls. There are areas of this game that I straight up dislike. I am never thrilled to be going into the Tomb of the Giants. I think this is the weakest area in the game for me. Nito is not a boss I am fond of, and again, the area just doesn't do it for me. The game can also be incredibly janky. When playing this game again last weekend so I could write this video, this happened. Centipede Demon went for an attack and just disappeared. I found him crawling around in the ceiling like a little madman. Eventually, he died. The game decided to put him out of his misery. But it's moments like these that make Dark Souls Dark Souls. You use what you can to your advantage. This sort of stuff doesn't always work in your favour either, so you use it when you can. I'm sure when playing we all have had moments of immense frustration when it comes to hitboxes or enemies seemingly getting unfair hits on you. Yet, we keep coming back. Nearly 13 years after its initial release, old players are still playing and new fans are discovering the game for the first time. What about this game that on the surface level seems like nothing more than rage bait keeps bringing people back? I think it's a complicated question, but again, it's about finding the perfection in the imperfect. Dark Souls is a game that has struggles, yes, but I don't think that is what the game is about. To me, the game is about overcoming those struggles, getting better and progressing despite what the game throws at you. It can be seen as an allegory for life. Life isn't always simple. Life can be really hard sometimes, but what choice do we have? We keep going, trying to do better each day. Obviously Dark Souls is not as important as life itself, but it is a game about triumph, a game about overcoming something really difficult, and against all odds, succeeding. I told the story of my first attempt at the game earlier, because I wanted to convey how impossible it felt back then. To me, this was a game that got the better of me. Nearly 3 years later I went back and finally did it. I overcame that and proved that something I once thought was impossible was in fact very possible. This can be applied to real life as well. Before I started streaming, that also felt impossible, like something I wasn't capable of doing. I would go to start and then criticize myself before I even started, saying things like no, you won't be good enough at it, or that it would just be embarrassing. I wanted to strive for perfection, but I don't think perfection exists without imperfection. Without the time and effort it takes to do something, to get better at it. You can only do the best of what you have. Things that to me felt impossible were one day very possible, because I decided to try and get better at those things. When playing Dark Souls, a lot of people use the phrase, just get good. On my first playthrough, to me this seemed like people taunting me, almost like them mocking the fact I just wasn't good enough. In hindsight, it is exactly that. You just have to get good. There is not an answer that someone can give that says yes, use this sword and you win. Yes, there are stuff that helps, but the people who do challenge runs of this game prove that all you need to beat Dark Souls is to get good and persevere. Yes, you will struggle and probably die countless times, but it's this struggle that makes the game beautiful. I gave up twice before finally coming back to the game and beating it. The feeling of beating Grim for the first time was amazing. The game hasn't made me feel that sense of triumph and achievement. Took all my struggles and used them to learn and get good. Again, much like life, I used my struggles and learned from them. I think there's a lot we can learn from Dark Souls and the mentality behind it. Much like the game, we are not perfect, but despite that, we are capable of great things. I wish I could sit down with myself from nearly 3 years ago when I first started this game and just explain that we don't have to instantly be good at something for it to be worth doing. This is something I still struggle with today. Even making these videos, I find myself being overly critical of myself despite me being new to this and learning a new skill. The life lessons this game taught me were huge. This is one of those games that is so much more than a game. I'm not one of those people that is going to claim that everyone has to beat Dark Souls or even play it, because I don't think that's true. It's not going to be for everybody, but that's okay. However, I do think that the lessons it teaches can apply to nearly anyone. Don't give up. The thing you always wanted to try, give it a shot. Whether it be streaming, making videos, art, music, whatever it is, try it. You might not be great at it at first, but don't let that demoralize you. Pick yourself up and keep trying. Have fun with it. Things don't have to be perfect for them to be great, because imperfection is perfection. Dark Souls proves that. Thank you for watching, guys. Let me know your Dark Souls story in the comments and make sure to like and subscribe. I play games over on Twitch, so feel free to come check me out over there. We do have a good time. Link is in the description, but for now, peace out.